Did you know that your small business, whether it's an LLC or a corporation, could lose its limited liability protection? There are ways it can happen. It's called piercing the corporate veil. It sounds painful. It's about as bad as it sounds. We're going to talk about it today. So earlier in this series, this is my Making It Legal series. This video is the fifth installment of the series. So go back and check out the earlier ones if you have not. But in part two, we discussed just the general value of having limited liability, whether it's an LLC or a corporation. And that value is that they can't come after you personally to take your stuff. They can only take the stuff that's inside of the corporation or the limited liability company, whether it's assets or cash or whatever it may be. But like many things in law, there are exceptions to that rule. And the major exception is the doctrine of piercing the corporate veil, which is also known as disregarding the corporate entity. They're both the same thing. And what that is when courts will look at a situation where someone's been treated unfairly, who has dealt with someone using this limited liability shield, and they say, this is so unfair that we're going to let you disregard the corporate entity and just go straight to the person as if they had no liability protection. So when does that happen? There are three primary factors that courts look at to determine whether to pierce the corporate veil. Let me just say this varies by state. I'm licensed to practice law in Ohio, but for the most part it is consistent. There is some variation when it comes to zooming into the granular details, but it's pretty consistent overall. The first thing the courts look at in trying to determine if a corporate veil should be pierced is, was the defendant in the case that the plaintiff is trying to pierce the corporate veil against, was that person basically an alter ego of the company? In other words, was the company and the person so tight that you really couldn't tell the difference? And ways that can be established, one big way is if you are paying for personal expenses out of your business account, or you're using a business account to pay for a bunch of other businesses that aren't related to that business. So that's one way, so not respecting the boundaries of the bank accounts. And another big way is corporate formalities. So this is having an operating agreement if you're a limited liability company, or regulations and bylaws if you're a corporation. It's also having regular recurring meeting minutes. You know, so if someone says, hey, do you have corporate formalities? You can show them a binder. Here's my operating agreement and here's my meeting minutes. So that's the first thing that courts look at. The second thing that courts look at is, and this is the big one, whether or not the defendant committed fraud against the plaintiff or an illegal act or a similarly unlawful act. So this is where a lot of the variation with states comes in. What's the definition of a similarly unlawful act? What type of illegal act? Some apply and some do not. So when you get to this level, you got to zoom in on what state you're in. But fraud is the case across the board. So if you commit fraud using your business, then you want to hide behind the liability shield. You're not going to be able to do that. So that's really the thing driving this piercing the corporate veil doctrine is fraud. Finally, the third thing is the courts look at whether there were actually damages to the plaintiff and whether those damages resulted from the fraud or illegal or similarly unlawful act committed by the defendant. So this is really okay, maybe I was fraudulent and maybe I didn't have corporate formalities, but you weren't really hurt that bad, and if you weren't even hurt at all, it wasn't because of me, it was because of something else. So this is a causation and damages sort of defense type argument. This argument's tough to make if that's all you have and you did commit fraud. So, but this all just depends on courts. And if you're in a situation with litigation, my friends, it is a roll of the dice. It does not always come out how you believe it objectively should be or how your lawyer says it's definitely going to go. It does not. It's a roll of the dice. So those are the three big factors we talked about. Number one, are you the alter ego of the company? Do you have corporate formalities? Are you spending your bank account funds appropriately? Number two, did you commit fraud? Don't do it. If you do, it's going to be bad. Number three, were there damages to the plaintiff that resulted from the fraud? So the moral of the story is, maintain your corporate formalities and don't commit fraud, and you're going to have that sweet, sweet liability protection, which is the whole reason you form a business entity in the first place. If there are other topics that you guys want to hear me talk about, please let me know in the comments. We'll be doing several more series coming up here in the future, and you can look for about 1 series video a week from me. Got some other things cooking as well. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you soon.